Hey, I'm back. Back to how to play Inquisitor. We are into injuries and recovery, and I brought up a card here so I can sort of work through that with you. We'll go through the hit locations, how you determine that, the damage, and the hit location table, and we'll just get through it and into it, and that should be it. You'll be knowing how to play most the way through the game. There's still awareness and powers and things like that, but this is the core sort of finish up for the core mechanics of the game. Everything else is just sort of the extra stuff that gets piled on, the awareness, how you see are aware of the table and things like that, and skills are just on top of, and they all go back to the core rules. So skill checks and things like that. So we'll get on to this a little bit, and I'll get moving. All right, so here is a normal record sheet with the showing the hit locations and any armor. This is for Sister Morgana, so I'd like to be able to get her back to the that battle that we were doing. Here's the figure, here's the character sheet. So we'll leave her to the side and move on to some location stuff like that. So the first thing we're going to need to worry about is the close combat hit location, and the character that, and a couple things to think about is a character normally has a better chance of hitting the upper part of the body or the head, so they may choose to add 10% to the roll to declare they're doing this before they roll the dice. You're just trying to determine that you're going for the upper. You're not trying to hit these people's legs all the time, so it's just an arbitrary 10% on top of your roll to keep the hits higher. If you look here, you got 1 to 3 for the right leg, 1 to 30 for the left leg, and the groin at 31 to 35. And it's not until you get above the 60s, 50s and 60s, that you get 40s, I guess. You start getting up, and you start getting above the halfway point. So if the defender is on the lower level, you can add a further 10%. So if there's a height difference to where they're attacking, you can add a further 10% if they're in a lower level. If the defender is being attacked from above, like if I was going to throw them up onto the stairway that I talked about in that last game. And then, whoa. Let's see if that will stay. Okay, and if the defender is on a higher level, then you can make the roll without a lot of modification. So if we're on that stairwell before, if they were a lower level, the defender, you don't have to make that modification. Damage rolls. So once we get into the damage rolls, it's whether or not we're hitting a considerable amount of damage, and we represent this with this base injury value here, and this is how much damage you'd have to take to reach one of these levels. You're going to be recording the actual numbers in here, but in the injury total, but we'll go through this here. See, most damage values such as guns, however, unless otherwise noted, additional point of damage is done for every 10 points of strength. So if you're in hand-to-hand combat, every 10 points of strength over 50, so her strength is 67, she would get a bonus of every 10 points, so she would get a bonus of a +1 here to the damage of just doing it with the knives down here. So I probably should just write it down there for my demo people, but that's just the way it is. So a character with a strength of like 80, you get a +3. So this is just a bonus. Unarmed close combat attacks inflict a D3 +1. So if you're just fighting back with your fists and or kicking or something like that, and then you get your for the additional strength, so you get to D3 +1 plus any additional for the strength. Improvised weapon is a D3 plus +2. So anything improvised, a bottle or a can or a chair leg or something like that. Thrown weapons such as daggers also So this is for like this knife. If you were to throw these knives, would also get gain that strength bonus. So now that we get that out of the way, we got the hit locations. Whoa, sorry. The hit locations. And so 1 to 3, 1 to 30 would be the leg. And the reason why these are the same, if you notice the 30 and the 1 to 30 here, and the arms at 36 to 65 and 36 to 65, you would be hitting the one that is on the space of the game table, the closest one to the attacker. And if you can't decide that, you can either randomize it or the GM can arbitrate that. So 1 to 30 is the legs, 31 to 35 is the groin, and then 36 to 65 is the arms, and 66 to 80 is the abdomen down here, and I guess I don't need to really write on that, but then the chest is 81 to 95, and 96 to 100 is the head. All right, so that's the hit locations, and you would roll that after you hit them. So you'd roll your skill to hit, and then you'd roll for your location. So you would just pull out a set of dice, and you'd determine your location of 32, which would be the groin. And that'd be after your roll for your to hit die roll, depending on the percentage to hit. So the next thing we should talk about is armor. So on these sheets I put a little armor box in each one. You just list your armor in the equipment here, of which case she has no armor. Somebody else might have armor, but armor, this is all for how much armor you would have there. So if we look at the table, and I'll throw that table up, and if you look at the table, you're going to have robes at 2, flak armor at 3, carapace armor at 6, powered armor at 10, a shield would be a 4, an open helmet is a 5, and a closed helmet is a 6. Now helmets will cause issues with awareness, but we'll get into that later in awareness. But that's just your basic locations for being hit. All right, so force fields, no matter any of the armor that they should be wearing, they could also be using a force field, and a force field is treated exactly like the armor, but the random value is generated for every hit. Simply roll the indicated number, like the refractive field was the D10, and you would roll the D10 and get a 9. That's how much it protects for every time it's hit in that location. So it would get hit, and you'd roll again next time, the next hit. Usually extend for several feet of the character's body, the force fields do, but they provide no protection in hand-to-hand unless the characters are at arm's length. So if they're at that 3-inch margin there at the arm's length that we talked about last, there you go. Next thing is cover, and I think I have a graphic to throw up for that, and the cover locations, types of cover. So wooden fence would be armor value of 2, a crate maybe a 3, barrel 5, brick and stone wall is an 8, rockcrete would be 10, plasteel would be 12, and armorplast would be 15. It all depends on how the table was set up and what kind of cover, what kind of stuff is going to be there. And then here's sort of the covered locations of the body. The guy standing behind a wall, it's going to be protecting his groin and legs if he's there. If he's just looking over and his head's exposed, so his head shot is pretty much with the only one that would have cover, the armor, the extra armor value for that cover. And if you look at the rest, looking around the corner, firing around, it's just sort of what's exposed, what's not exposed, and sort of GM players can sort of look and see what would be logically covered. And if it's kind of tricky when the character is trying to set up, you could explain when you're moving into a position that you're just poking your head over this, or you're looking around that corner, so everybody understands before anything else happens what the intent was when you got there. Kind of like I think Infinity does that. All right, so Then we jump into the effects of injury. So now that we got all the armor taken out, so you're going to determine if you're hit, and then you're going to determine the location, and there's the injury total. So the injury total is how much total damage you've taken, and that's what we got for that goes in here. The injury location is all these locations around. You'll notice some of them don't have a serious. They just have the light, heavy. They don't have the serious, and then you have the acute and critical. And some of them do have serious. It's because the head is going to go from one to the other a lot quicker, so it's just a lesser amount of boxes. And it's the same for the groin. It's just easier to get to the end of that deal there. So dependent on the base injury value of a wound, depends on what's going to happen here. So if I believe last test we did, she had taken a hit, and I can't remember where it was. So let's just roll that, and so 71 would be a hit to the abdomen, and she has no armor, and say the damage was 2d6. We would roll the 2d6, get 4, and it's not over this 6 for base injury value, so we're just going to take 4 damage here. Now say she gets hit again, and it's to a different location, 55, which would be one of the arms. We can go ahead and say it's the right arm, and then we roll for damage, and we get, that is actually a 1 on this old set, so 7, 8, 9. 9 is over the value. We're going to add the 9 to the 4 that we already have, but that 9, it doesn't go, hits twice, but it does go over once, so the right arm takes a light wound. And what is a light wound? Well, if we look at the damage table that I'll throw up here, the damage table for a light wound for the arm is nothing. It suffers no disadvantages from that. So, okay, so we'll say she gets hit again, and it goes 42, which is also the arm. We'll say it's the right arm again. She takes another hit for 3 dice to the right arm, and we only get 5. It doesn't break that value. It makes this a 16 for total value, but it doesn't break to the next serious wound. Now say in the future she got hit again there, and it was higher than the base injury value of 6, you would check off another box. And if we go back to that table for heavy, the character must immediately pass a strength test or drop whatever is being held in that hand. And then you have the strength for this test. You have the strength for that test. So if you took you're up to heavy, you can get up to serious. It's persistent. It's going to have their skills. It's going to have their strength. It's going to add damage. You get to acute, you're dropping everything there, and you're bleeding, in which case we're going to mark this thing for bleeding, and we're going to check that at the end of the turn. And any higher is a critical. I mean, maybe you lose the arm, if we went up to critical. So that's the basics of just getting that sort of figured out, of the damage and the damage levels. So if we move on, so the immediate and persistent effects, so like if it was the immediate effect showing on the table on heavy on the arm, you immediately pass that strength test, so whether or not you're going to drop one of her knives, and her strength is 67, and it's a half test. She got a 39. I believe she fails that test because her strength is halved at that point. Yes, it would be. So she would drop the knife in that arm, and then there's persistent things that are going to continue going on for the rest of the game because they've taken a serious wound, and it's just going to happen that way. All right, so that's serious persistent. Some things are going to cause a stun, and if you're stunned, you miss the indicated number of turns. And if they haven't acted yet that turn, they miss everything that turn. And during this time, they can't perform any actions except for to defend themselves. Like if they were knocked prone to the ground, they could still defend themselves, even if they were stunned, because they can sort of flail. When defending, he's got to use this as normal weapon skill. So, but being stunned really sucks because you just don't get to do anything, really. Bleeding, if they're indicated they're bleeding at the end of the turn, we see how much damage they lose. It's a D3 additional damage to the damage total here. So at the end of the turn, we're going to determine whether or not they're still bleeding in a D3, and that's 5/6, so it should be up to 19 just on that for the extra damage. Because you're bleeding out at the end of the turn, that's when we determine what's going on there, whether or not you can recover or not. And this doesn't go to that location, it just sort of goes to the overall total of the your total injury. It doesn't note that we didn't add it down here. It's added to the injury total. All right, so the injury total is just all those damage points that get gathered up, and how much damage you've taken totally. Now, what that does is this sort of like this represents overall pain, just the overall damage, you know, the bruises and everything else that's going on in a combat. Now, the first things that you have to worry about with that, it would be like system shock. More often than not, characters suffering a lot of damage will fall unconscious from the instant pain and shock. This is known as system shock. This is most likely caused by character falling casually. You're going to divide the character's toughness, and we already got that worked out right here. Her system shock is 13. So, divide characters. Okay, that gets the value. We already got that. He must pass a toughness test. So if you suffer a number of damage points equal from one hit, just one hit. If she was to suffer 13 points damage in one hit, she would have to make a toughness test or fall unconscious. That's system shock is a one-time hit thing, so don't get confused with falling from consciousness. Now, consciousness is here. It's on her. It's 32. So the system shock is going to, from instant, just one big hit. The damage is still going to get written up here even if they passed it. So it still could lead to their demise. So consciousness was the next thing that I was getting to there. And even if he doesn't succumb to some major system shock, sooner or later the pain and blood loss the character is going to black out from his injuries. And this is the consciousness value, and hers is 32. So if you get past the 32, if it total exceeds this consciousness value, the character is taken out of action, basically just collapses on the field and must be sort of counted as dead or a casualty and dealt with in some other way, whether her party members are dragging her off or whatever, or left to rot. Instant death. Sometimes the character will suffer so much injury that he will simply die. His mangled corpse is testimony to stubbornness, nothing else. If a character's injury total value is ever greater than his toughness, then he is dead. So if this value here is greater than this value here, they're dead. So they're dead, not unconscious, dead. Just so you know, they're mangled, they're strewn all over, they're just gone, they're not alive anymore. And so if you go out of action because of any of these things, the character is said to be out of action casually. He is out of action, you normally can't recover from any point during the game. And typically you just leave the character lying in place on the field where they were, so other characters can come over there. They can show them mercy or capture them or execute them if that's what they need to do. sometimes, they just leave, so they're just left there. A character is out of action, can be dragged away, as noted in the movement section. The character out of action can be attacked in close combat and is hit automatically. So there we go. Recovery. So let's say you took all these wounds. You're not unconscious. You're just taking a lot of wounds and you're still awake. We can get rid of that. We're up to 19, I guess. And bleeding. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So let's say a recovery. So at the end of the turn, you can roll a toughness test to determine whether or not you can recover. So you are going to take that toughness test, and that's just sort of your raw fortitude, your just gut check time, and you're going to roll versus that toughness. And let's see here, where we got, let's get these dice over the way here. All right, her toughness is 65. And she gets 100, she totally fails, so she doesn't recover. Let's say, we'll be nice and say it was actually a 65, and her toughness is 65, and it's a 63, and she passed. So if she passed, you're going to recover D3 damage, 1 from, that was a 19, we'll go 18. So you're going to recover at the end of the turn, at the end of the whole round for everybody. You're going to go through this phase of recovery. And so she's going to recover 1 point. She could have recorded up to 3, D3. You get to add 1 for every full 10 points of toughness over 50, though. So she gets actually 2. So 17. And so her toughness 65. So every full 10 points over 50, you get a +1 to that roll. So, which is nice. So, there's that. If you're bleeding, you're going to be rolling a dice for the bled, how much you bled, how much more you bled. I think I have all of it written down here. So, bleeding, D3 to the total for every turn here. Recovery, successful toughness test. I have it all in the card to make it easier. For locations, that sort of explains which one's the closest. There's some things down here about the system, explaining the stun, the prone, the system shock, the consciousness, and instant death, just to make it easier for the people that are playing in my games, so they know what's going on. So what do we got? We got the damage tables. Oh, and then the summary. So the damage tables, just to sort of explain what each one of these mean, the damage tables, the levels. So the light, heavy, serious, acute, and critical mean. Light mean represents just sort of fairly minor cuts and abrasions, maybe some bruising, but it's not enough to bother the hardened warrior from continuing with their mission. Heavy damage is nasty, representing serious cuts, sprains, or a torn muscle. Serious injuries include damage to the bone, internal organs, and so on. Maybe include heavy bleeding. Acute injuries are those which render the character almost incapable, and very serious fractures, dislocations, vicious exit wounds, and extensive muscle damage. So they're really in bad shape. Crippling injuries are just that, crippling. The character who suffers a critical injury is likely to become a casualty, if not, in most cases, will die. A limb or internal organs are so seriously damaged they cease to work. Character may be severely stunned from the shock, or maybe even barely manage to hold on to consciousness. All right, so there's the damage table. So look at again, and I'll leave that there for a little bit. That's just sort of what you can see there. So, head injury, that's light. Even a light head injury is going to stun you for D3 turns. So you could be out of it for a little while. And then let's jump straight to the last table here, which is the injuries and recovery summary. So let me throw this down here, and I've highlighted it all for you. So hit location, and that's the D100 after you take the combat hit, and you're going to roll for the location. The damage rolls are indicated number of dice indicated in the weapons profile. How much damage is caused. Each additional damage for every 10 point of strength, so that's just the extra damage you're gonna deal for your strength over 50. Effects of injury, the injury locations. We talked about stunned, bleeding, system shock, injury total, consciousness, and instant death, and then what you can do to recover at the end of a round. Well, at the end of the turn, the round. It's correct, and that is that. That is the injury total. Let me see. What else do we have here? All right, so that's pretty much injury and recovery. It's a nice, tight little video, I think. Everything's in there. If there really, there's things that I might miss, things that I might have glossed over. If you have any questions, Adam, comment to the video. I'll gladly go back and do a Q&A session on any of the stuff that we've done in these how-to videos. If there's things that I've got wrong, I'd love to discuss, because I'm liable to get things wrong here and there. It happens, even during games. Let me see. I think that's it. We'll move on to awareness in the next video. I just uploaded the second part of the initial live action play, and I'll work on probably there's going to be 2 more parts for that first game, so I'll be getting to those later this week. Thanks for watching.